Welcome to the Candidates Forum for the 9th Hampden District House of Representatives, which includes parts of Springfield and Chicopee. Food for thought, food justice, and health equity. The candidates are Springfield School Committee member Denise Hurst, Sean Mullan, and Springfield City Councilor Orlando Ramos. The candidates will be moderated by Mike Dobbs, Managing Editor of the Reminder Publications. Sponsors include the Food Bank of Western Mass, Springfield Food Policy Council, the Urban League of Springfield, and CISA, Community Involved for Sustaining Agriculture. And please remember to vote on September 1st.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being with us tonight. On behalf of our sponsors and co-sponsors, I am really happy to welcome you here. My name is Liz Ogilvie. I serve as the director of the Springfield Food Policy Council. And as you know, we have a big primary coming up with some seats to fill. Tonight, our candidates who we are thrilled to have joined us are Denise Hurst, Sean Mullan, and Orlando Ramos, and we will be asking them questions that we have gotten from our partners. That means you who are interested in knowing how these candidates will serve us should they be elected to replace State Representative Jose Tosado. I have to remind everyone, if you haven't already registered, Saturday is the last day to do so for the primary, and we need everyone to exercise their votes. We are not asking you to vote for a particular person, but we are asking you to consider the people who labored to make sure that we could all vote, and we need everyone to vote. We have early voting and vote by mail now, so there's no need to go in person. You can find all of this info at the Secretary of State's website, and it's also a link on the Springfield Food Policy Council website. Now, I want to turn things over to our wonderful moderator, Mike Dobbs. Mike is the managing editor of the Reminder Publishing, and I'm sure some of you have joined me in reading his articles about Springfield and other cities in our region. And something that I said about him today that I want him to know, I think. He writes so beautifully about Springfield, and it's so clear that he loves us as a city, and it's a treasure to have. And now it's on you, Mike.
Gosh, thanks. I'm going to ask my boss for a raise. After that introduction, geez. Let me explain what we're going to do tonight with the 9th Hampden Springfield State Representative candidates. These are the Democratic candidates, and one of them will emerge the winner from the primary on September 1st. 2 rounds of questions. Round 1 will consist of 4 questions. Each seconds left, then 15 seconds, and then when your time is up completely, you'll see a stop sign and you will hear this bell. Please keep to the allotted time if you can. If you don't use the entire 90 seconds, that's fine. We'll move on to the next candidate. Round 2 will be a little bit different. There are going to be 12 questions, and each candidate will answer 4 of the 12 questions and have 60 seconds to answer. At each turn, candidates will choose a number between 1 and 12, and I will read the corresponding question. Each question can only be answered once. After round 2, we will have closing remarks from each of the candidates, and that will be 90 seconds in total. So let's meet our candidates. First off, and we're doing these alphabetically, School Committee member Denise Hurst, Sean Mullan, and Springfield City Councilor Orlando Ramos. And they are running for the Democratic ticket to hopefully replace State Rep Jose Tosado, who's stepping down after 3 terms. Denise Hurst is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and Springfield College School of Social Work. Since 2009, she has served as a member of the Springfield School Committee. She is currently the vice president of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. With a career defined by community engagement, Hurst has been a policymaker and legislative advocate at the state, local, and federal levels. Her path began as a social worker and clinician, ultimately rising to area director within the State Department of Mental Health. In 2016, she was appointed by State Treasurer Deb Goldberg as regional manager of the Massachusetts State Lottery here in Western Massachusetts. Right now, she serves as Vice President of Advancement and External Affairs at Springfield Technical Community College here in Springfield. Most recently, she was named 2019 Woman of the Year by the Professional Women's Chamber. Next up to Sean Mullan, who is the chair of the Springfield Ward 2 Democratic Committee. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the College of the Holy Cross and a master's degree in education from Elms College. He has been civically engaged in our area for years, volunteering on various issue campaigns, including Raise Up Massachusetts campaign to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and to introduce paid family and medical leave. As a member of the Springfield chapter of Neighbor to Neighbor, he's worked directly with other residents to register voters and advocate for working families. Finally, Orlando Ramos was born and raised in Springfield. He is a carpenter by trade and loving father to his daughter, Ariana. Over the years, he has demonstrated his passion and commitment to public service. He's a 4-term councilman, 2-term council president, and is currently the chairman of public safety. Orlando has also had a decade of State House experience where he previously worked for the Massachusetts State Legislature. He has a bachelor's degree in public policy from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and a master's in public administration from Westfield State University. Okay, so.
Can you repeat the intro, the format quickly?
Okay, so I've just been instructed to repeat the format because it may be a little bit confusing at first here, folks. So what we have is a group of 4 questions. Each of those questions will be answered by each of our contestants. They will have 90 seconds to answer the question, and we're going to rotate the order in which they answer. So not everybody gets a crack at being the first one, and also being the last word. So that's how it's going to work out. So the first question here, as I shuffle my papers to get to it, here we go. The first question is going to be from the Springfield Food Policy Council. COVID-19 has showed us more clearly than ever the relationship between food access, diet-related diseases, and negative health outcomes for those who get this virus. What would you do to address any of these issues? The first person to answer that question would be Denise Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbs, and thank you to all of our sponsors for allowing us the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. So, yes, we have seen the devastating effects of COVID-19, and in particular in communities of color, and for those who have pre-existing conditions, particularly diabetes, respiratory conditions. And so I do believe that it is critically imperative that we begin to educate people as early as possible around what it means to be healthy and what that looks like with respect to our food choices, with respect to our wellness and our exercise, in order to help mitigate some of those health conditions that we know can wreak havoc in our lives and be even more compromised when we are faced with such a condition such as COVID-19. I think it's important from as a school committee member to think about what my role can be in ensuring that our kids know at an early age how important it is to eat vegetables, how important it is to be active, how important it is to have a well-balanced diet. And I've done a lot of that work and have supported many policies around making sure that we're providing our kids and their parents and families and the community with those resources and knowledge to ensure that they can start at an early age to live a long, healthy, productive life.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, Sean, you will be next with an answer to that question.
Yes, COVID-19 has hit Springfield particularly hard in working class communities and communities of color, and Springfield and Chicopee being both. We have an access issue in Springfield when it comes to food. There are a lot of areas and neighborhoods that don't have direct access to grocery stores. People need to take public transit to reach them. And I would really like to see development of smaller grocery access points I lived abroad, and when I came back to the United States after a short period there, I was kind of shocked that you can't walk to buy groceries. And I was without a car here in Springfield for about 5 to 6 years, and walking to the Springfield Plaza from where I live was not really feasible, and the bus doesn't get there without actually transferring downtown. So a lot of people have issues accessing groceries. In terms of diet, we're very lucky in the state of Massachusetts to have the Healthy Incentives Program, which leverages SNAP assistance. I'd like to see that turned into a permanent program to ensure that people have access to healthy food. Vegetables and fresh meat are much more expensive than processed goods. So families that do not have enough resources in order to make their dollars reach go for those unhealthy meals, not necessarily because they prefer them, but because that's all that they can afford. So I'd like to see the state work to make those federal dollars go further for people in order to eat healthier. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Orlando, it's your turn.
Thank you. Yes, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the many vulnerabilities that we have here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in communities of color. One of which is the fact that we don't have access to fresh food and grocery stores, right, in a lot of inner cities and a lot of communities of color. These are referred to as food deserts. Indian Orchard being one of them is the community that I represent. Mason Square is another. I became very familiar with this issue when I was working in the Massachusetts State Legislature, where we had conversations as to how we bring more access to fresh food and healthy food to these communities. One of the first things that I would do as state representative is I would introduce legislation to incentivize grocery stores to build, develop, expand in communities of color and in these food deserts to provide fresh, healthy foods to those who need it. It's sad that we have to incentivize it, but after years of asking, begging, after years of conversations, after years of research, it's fairly obvious that they're not going to come voluntarily. And so if we incentivize them, then hopefully we'll be able to attract more grocery stores to these communities.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, so we're now on our second question. And by the way, Sean, you will be up for the first response to it. And this question is, tell us what you've done in your current role that's made a difference in the life of residents of your district. And what is something you will do to make a difference if you get to be elected? Sean?
During the ongoing COVID emergency, I've been working with mutual aid to help people access food. I've driven people to grocery stores. I've anonymously dropped off Stop and Shop gift cards. It's something that I generally do on my own. I've also been volunteering up at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts warehouse in Hatfield on a weekly basis, and I intend to continue doing that. I would like to take that drive for public service and helping people into Boston. I really am running to serve the residents of the district and to serve the common good. And what I really want to do is help as many people as possible through public policy in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Orlando, same question.
Could you clarify? Are you referring to what I've done is city council during the COVID-19 pandemic or overall?
Well, it says what you've done in your current role made a difference in the life of the residents of the district. So that can be your city council work in general, if you'd like.
Gotcha. Okay, so I could go down the line. I wish I had more than a minute and a half to talk about my accomplishments as a city councilman. I'm very proud of my record as a city councilman, two-term council president. I was the initiator of the piece of legislation that brought body cameras to the city of Springfield. It's an issue that is very important to many people who have had negative experiences with police officers, but it's also an issue that protects the taxpayers. And so it's an issue that is important to all taxpayers of the city of Springfield. I was the author of a senior tax work-off program, which is a program that gives seniors an opportunity to be able to work off a portion of their property taxes. A very important piece of legislation that helps seniors to be able to live in dignity and security. I authored a responsible employer ordinance a tax increment finance ordinance, and a housing development initiative program ordinance, all three which are intended to protect the taxpayers from developers that cheat by making sure that they pay the correct wages, that they hire people from the city of Springfield, that they hire locally, and that they contribute to the local economy, and that they play by the rules. I authored a facial surveillance technology ordinance to protect the taxpayers from unnecessary lawsuits and protect the public from unnecessary public surveillance. What I will do at the state level is to continue to do the work to protect the people, to protect the taxpayers, but more importantly, to be a listener. I've always been a good listener. I've always made myself accessible to the people who I represent, and I'll continue doing so as a state rep.
Thank you, Orlando. Okay, Denise, same question.
Absolutely. So both personally and professionally, I have also donated to the various food banks and open pantries. I also have volunteered my time, but as a policymaker, I have supported programs such as gardening the community. I have supported pieces of policies at the school committee level that have helped implement breakfast in the classroom so that our students are able to eat in the classroom, because we know that they are much more productive and are able to concentrate when they have a well-balanced meal. I actually have helped to cultivate relationships in my current position at the college to really ensure that our students in higher ed have access to food, because there is a food desert in the Mason Square area and in different parts of the city as well. But we also know that a lot of our students come to us with a lot of hunger needs and a lot of food insecurities. So really cultivating those relationships with corporate partners such as Stop and Shop. I've also worked on the school wellness policy with the Springfield Food Council, Springfield Food Council policy, and making sure that, we're really taking into consideration the whole child. I also just wanted to say that when elected to the state legislature, I want to ensure that we keep programs such as HIP. I want to ensure that we allocate funding to ensure that people have access to food assistance programs so that they can feed their families.
Okay, thank you very much. So the third question, and the first one to answer the first question will be Orlando. The third question is, what is your number one policy priority? And what would be a few action steps that you would take to further it?
Well, I think that the number one thing that's on people's minds right now is COVID, right? Everything revolves around COVID. Everything revolves around this pandemic. Many people have lost loved ones. Many people, unfortunately, including myself, have lost their jobs. People are hurting. They're wondering how they're going to be able to make ends meet. They're wondering where their next paycheck is going to come from. They're wondering whether or not they're going to be able to pay their mortgage, whether they can safely send their children to school. As a dad, I share that concern, and I share all of those concerns because I've been affected personally by COVID financially, and I share the concerns of the people. So my number one priority is to have a responsible and smart response, recovery, and resiliency plan for COVID-19. During the response of COVID, I was able to work together with the Greater Senior Services and the Department of Health to provide masks for senior citizens. I advocated for the Springfield Water and Sewer to freeze their rates. And I have a plan. If you go to my website at voteorlandoramos.com, you'll be able to see my 3-point plan. I wish I had more time to go through all of what's in it in terms of response and resiliency. But it's very important that we also have a resiliency plan because we have to protect ourselves from future pandemics. We have to learn from this current pandemic and make sure that we're ready in the event of a future pandemic.
Okay, Denise Hurst, it is your turn to answer that question about your policy priority.
Sure. So, I think that it's really hard to think about what other things could be more important in this day and age, considering the national and local and statewide landscape with respect to COVID-19. But I think that we'd be naive to not recognize that at the foundation of COVID-19 is a lot of racial injustices that help to feed the health disparities and the food insecurities that we're talking about today. So my very first priority would be to really take a good look at what policies and pieces of legislation currently exist that are helping to support those racist policies and practices that are in place. It would be fantastic to be only focused on COVID-19, but we have to remember that once we're on the other side of this, that there are still systemic and institutional barriers that we have to think about that have truly laid the foundation of the impacts, the devastating impacts that this virus has had on us.
Thank you. Sean, your turn.
Thank you. It's hard to just pick one being a policy person, but ultimately I'm going to choose one of the issues that's motivated me to run, and that's tenant protections. I was in Boston last year and again in January lobbying for passage of a local option tenant protection bill. And with what's happening because of COVID-19, people losing employment and now finding out that they might not be able to continue to afford to pay their rent or their mortgages, I think it's really important that we pass legislation that protects both tenants and homeowners from eviction and foreclosure, and that also helps address problems with housing affordability. It's not a state mandate, it's to allow communities to enact their own legislation if they want to. I would like to work with legislators on Beacon Hill to advance that bill as much as I can. It's something that's really important to me. I think it would help a lot of people here in Springfield as rent has increased significantly during the last few years. I'm sure residents can attest to that. And that is something that I think would serve many of the people here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Our final question in this round, the first person to answer it will be Denise Hurst. The question is, anyone who lives in Western Massachusetts understands that there are disparities in funding, infrastructure, wages, employment, broadband between the eastern and western parts of the state. What do you think are some of the most serious disparities, and what would you do to overcome them?
Sure. So I think that that we have to acknowledge that one of the reasons that we're on here is because our sponsor is the Food Bank of Western Mass. So we know that Hampden County experiences a great deal of food insecurity. We also know that funding oftentimes doesn't make its way outside of 495. And I know firsthand from being on the school committee that it has been a tireless fight to ensure that the second largest district in the Commonwealth gets its fair share of funding, right? We're asked to do so much more with less. And so I think that there are extreme disparities and inequities when we think about west to east. I think we've seen that with respect to how funding gets allocated, how COVID tests get distributed, what transportation looks like, from the hills and the Berkshires down to the valley where we are. So I think it's really important as the next state legislature to really bang the drum and make noise around how important it is to fund and to take into consideration Western Mass. I also think it's really important for us to highlight the benefits of Western Mass, the jewels that we have here, because if we don't do that, then the folks in Boston aren't going to necessarily see the benefits of investing in us. And I also think it's really important that we have a delegation that goes to Boston and advocates collectively.
Thank you. Orlando, what would your answer be?
In my district, as the Ward 8 councilman, I represent the community of Indian Orchard. Indian Orchard has traditionally referred to itself as the forgotten neighborhood of the city of Springfield. And I think if you look at the disparity between how the legislature and the decision makers fund programs and infrastructure, et cetera, on the eastern part of the state compared to how they support the city of Springfield. I would argue that the city of Springfield is the Indian Orchard of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because we are the forgotten city of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's across the board. I would say the disparity is across the board. Wages, local aid, school funding, transportation, all of it. And that's why it's important, in my opinion, to have an experienced legislator to go to Boston and to fight for the city of Springfield to make sure that we get our fair share. You know, I'm tired of being forgotten. I'm tired of of Boston forgetting about Springfield. Just last week, I sent a letter to the governor to ask him to reconsider the denial of a grant that was denied for the city of Springfield to help local restaurants. Almost every community in the mid central Massachusetts to eastern Massachusetts received funding, but city of Springfield got denied for our grant proposal. So I sent a letter from the city council asking them to reconsider. And that's just one small example as to how we're always forgotten and we're always left out of these big decisions. So I want to go to Boston and make sure that we get our fair share.
Okay, and Sean, what would your answer be?
I think first and foremost, healthcare services. We can see that right now with closing of the pediatric psychiatric unit at Providence Hospital. We do not have the services that we need for our residents here in Western Massachusetts when it comes particularly to mental health and substance abuse services. When people want to enter recovery, they're told that there are no beds here in Springfield. They're often told that no beds at all in Western or Central Massachusetts, that in order to get help, they either need to wait, which means that they may immediately relapse, or they have to leave their families and their support networks to cross the state. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous. When people want help to get better, they should be able to get those services here locally. And when they talk about these services in Boston, they tend to think, again, as with most things in the state, of themselves in Eastern Mass, forgetting about us. Secondly, I think that we need to work on connecting Springfield to the economy in the rest of the state via East-West Rail. We're often a second thought in terms of economic development. And if we are able to get that connection with Boston, it's my hope that we're able to leverage it to really, really grow our community in a way that we have not been able to before now, because we are in many ways disconnected from Boston. We don't have a connection to them. And I really want to see that connection formed via rail so that people are easily able to commute and travel between Springfield and Boston.
Thank you very much, Sean. Okay, so that would end our first round of questioning. Now we go into our second round of questioning. And in the second round of questioning, we have 12 questions, and each of the candidates will get a turn selecting a question by number. You just tell me I want number 3 or number 4. I read the question, and then we move on to the next candidate and next question until we exhaust all 12 questions. So the first candidate who can pick a number from 1 to 12 would be Sean Mullan. Sean, what would you like to pick?
The number 12.
Number 12, okay. And Christina Maxwell will be taking each of those numbers off of the board to help you keep track about what questions have been answered already. Okay, number 12, this question is from the Springfield Food Policy Council. What is your position on mass health? Do you think it meets the needs of all residents and not insured privately, who are not insured privately? What would you do to propose an increase of access and decrease its costs, make it more affordable?
Well, first and foremost, I think as a single adult male who has been on mass health, I've had extreme difficulties navigating and signing up for it. And I know that happens with a lot of people who are not on standard mass health. When I signed up, I decided I was going to enroll in one insurer because you have to choose an insurer. And I was then told, well, 2 weeks ago, that insurer stopped covering you. And then I got a letter in the mail 3 weeks later saying that my insurer through Mass Health had been changed again. It's very confusing for people fairly often. So I think that we need to work on reducing the administrative burden, making it much easier and clearer for people to use. In terms of cost control, Mass Health itself already saves a substantial amount of money when compared to private payers. The reimbursement rate is lower. I think it's very difficult to save money on the payment end. because of that fact, we need to ensure that patients are able to access care. And because those reimbursement rates are not particularly high, it's already difficult to access care at this time with Mass Health.
Thank you, sir. Okay, question number 2 would go to Orlando Ramos. Ramos, pick a number between
Number one.
Number 1. How would you address social isolation and food insecurity for older adults during COVID? Understanding that people over the age of 65 and those with certain health conditions are safer at home to minimize risk and exposure.
Yeah, so we have a very big senior population in the Ninth Hampden district. I have a very high senior population in my district in Ward 8. And these are folks that are traditionally have taken part in the Brown Bag program at the Myrtle Street Park building. They have traditionally visited the Raymond Jordan Senior Center and the Pine Point Senior Center before it closed. Folks who enjoy each other's company, right? And so it makes it difficult for these seniors who don't have access to internet, et cetera, to be able to congregate with their fellow seniors. So I would support programs such as Meals on Wheels. I would support more funding for Greater Springfield Senior Services to make sure that they're able to create programs to help these seniors stay involved and bring the services to them at their home.
Thank you very much, sir. Question number 3 would go to Denise Hurst. So,
Mike Dobbs, I think you picked my number for me.
I did?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You said question number 3.
No,
okay,
no.
Got it.
No.
All right. I'm going to pick 9 for the Ninth Hampden district.
Okay, here we go. This question is also from the Springfield Food Policy Council. Since farmers struggle to make a living and so many of their neighbors struggle with food insecurity, what ideas do you have for getting locally grown food to city residents, district residents, who do not have enough food?
Sure. So I think that my idea isn't necessarily a new idea. I think it would be more so that I would help to support some of the initiatives that are already happening. And so instead of farmers having to take their crops and the food that they have produced and throwing them away, I think that we need to support the programs that are in place where they're able to distribute them to their neighbors. They're able to share them with places such as the Food Bank of Western Mass so that they can distribute them to those who are in need. I think it only makes sense to make sure that we're able to reuse, reutilize, and really support one another when we see that there is a need. So I think it's also really important to ensure that that we help and support farmers get that food to farmers markets, and then in turn it allows them to have some revenue, maybe not the same amount of revenue that they were getting before, but at least it allows them to have something and allows those to have access to some food.
Okay, thank you very much. Sean, pick a number.
How about the number 7?
Okay, number 7. Let me just got a lot of papers here that I'm shuffling today. Here we go. Number 7, increasing urban green and open spaces is one way for a city to also increase public health outcomes and for people to have access to community gardens. How would you support urban garden programs?
So I would like to see more open space that's presently not built on used as community gardens. I know that the city has a fair amount of property that it is sitting on that is fallow, that's not currently used. I'd like to see some of that area made available, and I think that the state should incentivize that use. The city would like to see money come out of it, and I think the state should consider possibly providing assistance to residents to purchase the property and create community gardens in their own areas. In terms of public health outcomes, I've noticed for a long time that there are a lot of areas of the city, particularly here in Ward 2 in Liberty Heights, that no longer have trees on their tree belts. I would like to see the state provide more direct assistance to community groups like Regreen Springfield to plant more trees in the community, because that does really increase public health. It decreases temperature, and it makes it a much more pleasant place to live.
Thank you very much, Sean. The next question goes to Orlando Ramos.
11.
11. The Healthy Incentives Program, or HIP, has provided access to locally grown produce for 70,000 households in the Commonwealth who face hunger by piggybacking on the SNAP program. However, those 70,000 households represent only 7% of all SNAP households. How would you commit to fighting for the continued growth and funding of the HIP program?
Well, the first thing we got to do is make it a permanent program, right? I mean, it's my understanding that right now it's sort of renewed on a year-by-year basis. First thing we have to do is make it permanent. I think that it's shown to be successful. It's shown to have a positive impact on families that are in need. And so the first thing that I would do is have a conversation about how we make it permanent and how we expand it to make it more accessible to even more families to benefit from this program.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so Denise, you're next to pick a number.
I'll pick 5.
5. This district traditionally has low voter turnout. Why do you think this is, and can anything be done to address it?
Can you repeat the question? This district has low voter turnout, and I missed the second part, Mike.
Why do you think that is, and what can be done to address low voter turnout?
Sure. So I think that there are a variety of reasons as to why we have low voter turnout. I think that we have a population of people who might not necessarily realize how important their vote is, who might not necessarily understand the process of voting and might find the process intimidating. I also think that we have people who aren't so sure that their vote really counts. And so I do think that we really need to do a better job at making voting more accessible, and which we are doing now in the midst of the pandemic, is that we're offering vote by mail, we're offering early voting, and we're also offering voting in person. I think one of the things that I've seen is that there still has yet to be enough advertising and marketing to ensure that voters know what their options are. And I think that voters also need to know who and why they're voting for certain things.
Thank you very much. Okay, Sean, pick a number.
Number 3.
Number 3. This question is from the Springfield Food Policy Council. Are you working with or communicating with organizations in the district that serve low-income and food-insecure constituents? In that case, which organizations, and what have they told you about hunger in the district?
I've not been communicating with organizations about policy because I'm not presently in office, but I have been volunteering with the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, not just in Hatfield, but also at multiple food banks, a couple different ones. So I don't really have an answer beyond that. Thank
Okay,
you.
sir. Okay, so next up for a question would be Orlando Ramos.
Give me number 2.
Number 2. Okay, here in the city of Springfield, we have 2 organizations, Gardening in the Community and Wellspring. And they both have shown that agriculture can happen in urban areas. What would you do to encourage more of this activity in the city of Springfield?
First of all, I was involved in the process to bring Wellspring Harvest to the city of Springfield. That is in my district in Ward 8 and in Orchard. They approached me early on in the process, and I fell in love with the idea. I know that the idea of bringing a greenhouse to a Brownsfield was somewhat raised eyebrows for a lot of people. But once they explained the process and explained how they would be able to grow vegetables, healthy food, and partner with community partners, it was a brilliant idea. I loved it. I wrote letters of support. I attended community meetings. I advocated and spoke at hearings in favor of them. And so I would love to see that duplicated. I would love to see that expanded. Just recently, I secured an office space for them on Main Street for them to be able to expand to other co-ops. And they're going to be opening up a cafe on Main Street in the Orchard. So I love those programs, and I would continue to advocate for them at the state level.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, so the next question selection would go to Denise Hurst.
Number 4.
Number 4, from farm workers to people who prepare food for market, and then to the people who actually sell food. They're all essential workers. What would you do to ensure that they have access to free and proper PPE, testing for COVID, and for childcare?
Absolutely. So what I strongly believe that we need to advocate to ensure, we need to fight to ensure that they have access to those things, to PPE, to childcare, to fair wages, so that they can support their families. And so I think that needs to start locally. I also think it needs to start on a statewide level where we're able to appropriate and allocate funds. And I also think that we need to ensure, and when I say locally, I mean because we want to make sure that locally we know who needs it, how can we get it to them, who is in need, because we've already talked about how we're disconnected from Boston. And so my role would be to ensure that I'm fighting for that in the legislature and making sure that it's appropriated, and that when it gets to the local level, it's getting dispersed and distributed to those who truly need it. And I think that it has to happen as a collective effort, and that the local delegation really needs to ensure that we're speaking with one voice to get those things.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next question would go to Sean Mullan. Sean, pick a number.
Number 10.
Number 10. Despite 15 states allowing immigrants who are lacking legal status to get a driver's license, Massachusetts does not. What is your position on passing a policy for those people to get a driver's license?
I fully support it. And I was kind of surprised at how many people were not aware of the fact that we weren't one of those states. I was at the hearings for the Welcoming Community Ordinance here in Springfield, and many of the people who came to testify talked specifically about the lack of licenses and how difficult that makes their lives, how concerned they are about driving, but they need to drive to work, they need to drive their children to school, and ultimately for public safety purposes. It's also much better for the community to have these people licensed and insured, as all people should be in the state of Massachusetts by law. So it's really just ensuring that everybody who is driving has a license, has insurance, and it's also, in my opinion, a human right issue, because these people are trying to just go about their daily lives and provide for their families, and they should be able to do so without fear when it comes to having to drive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Orlando Ramos, you have a choice of question 6 or question 8.
Let's go with number 8.
Number 8. Massachusetts has food deserts. City of Springfield has food deserts. What role would you play in providing greater access to healthy foods through additional supermarkets in the district?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, I represent a district that encompasses the community of Indian Orchard, and which is currently defined as a food desert because of the lack of access to healthy foods. One of my first priorities would be to introduce legislation at the state level to incentivize organizations and companies to come in and build supermarkets or retrofit current existing built structures to provide fresh food and healthy food to the communities. But not only that, we also have to provide more support for the mobile farmers markets, et cetera. And so, that's one of the things that I would look at the state level, to see if there's any way that we can provide more funding for those types of services.
Thank you. And Denise Hurst, you have question number 6, whether you like it or not.
Yes, sir.
This question is from the Springfield Food Policy Council. If you were elected, which House committees do you see as having the greatest priority, and on which would you request to serve?
Sure. So I think the greatest priority would probably be the education committee for me in particular. I think that that is right in my wheelhouse with respect to a lot of the work that I have done locally as a school committee woman, statewide with the Association of School Committees, and then nationally, right, as part of the National School Board Association. But education, because I think that at the end of the day, education is truly what we're all talking about, is really making sure that people understand and have access to knowledge, and that knowledge that is going to help them make the best decisions for themselves and for their families, whether it's around how to ensure that they get training so that they can get better jobs, so that they can support their families, how they can eat better, how they can, be more engaged and civically engaged citizens. For me, I think that education is truly powerful, and it is really the key that unlocks the door.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you, for some really interesting answers to these questions. It gives the voters a lot of information about what you like to do if you were elected. So now we come to our segment with closing statements. And just to give you a framework for the closing statements, the question we'd like you to answer is, why did you decide to run for this seat, and why should voters support you? So the first person here, going alphabetically by last name, would be Denise Hurst.
Sure. So I will speak candidly, and that I've always thought about how I could be expanding my role as a policymaker, how I could continue to be an advocate for those who are marginalized and underrepresented and underserved. And it wasn't until I found out that our current representative, Jose Tosado, was retiring that I decided to run. I thought to myself, this is my opportunity to really expand on the work that I've been doing, not only as a school committee woman, but as a commissioner for the Mass Commission on the Status of Women, as a higher ed administrator. And so I thought to myself, I have cultivated great relationships at the state legislature. I have helped to enact amazing policies that have truly helped to change the lives of those here in Western Massachusetts through the Student Opportunity Act, through the Gender Equity Bill, to the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And so I thought to myself, it's not enough to say that we don't have enough women, we don't have enough people of color, and you should run. And I said to myself, you need to step up and do exactly what it is that we often tell everyone else to do. And so I am committed to continuing my work as an advocate and making sure that the 9th Hampden District has sustainable change and representation.
Thank you, Denise. So we need a closing statement from you, Sean Mullan.
Okay, thank you, Mike Dobbs, for moderating this evening's forum. And I'd like to thank the 4 organizations for co-sponsoring it and bringing the 3 of us here with you tonight. I decided to run to become our state representative because I wanted to fight directly on Beacon Hill for us. We need to develop our capacity to take on the challenges that we all face. Our state government should be there for us when we need it, be it for our education and training, the health of our families, or our senior security. I've traveled many times to Beacon Hill to advocate and lobby for different issues, ranging from $15 an hour, which is now law, along with paid family and medical leave, to tenant protections and automatic voter registration. I have a strong interest in public policy and am committed into pursuing the common good in a transparent and honest manner. When I heard Representative Tosado was retiring, I thought I had an opportunity and chance to serve the community through elective office. I'll fight for our share in Boston and to empower our local communities to improve themselves. To grow, our district needs to innovate and explore new policy approaches, and that's why I'm asking for people's vote on September 1st.
Thank you very much, sir. And last, Orlando Ramos.
Thank you for this opportunity to give us a chance to reach the voters and talk about the differences between the candidates. I was born and raised in the city of Springfield. This is the community that I love. This is the community where I chose to raise my daughter, who is now 16 and a half and going into the 11th grade. I love the city of Springfield. I've had the privilege and honor of representing Ward 8 on the Springfield City Council, serving as council president, and serving on the council since since I was elected in 2013. It's been the greatest honor of my life, and I want to continue to serve my community, continue to serve the city of Springfield on a greater scale. This COVID-19 pandemic has devastated communities across the country, including here in the city of Springfield and in Chicopee, where many people have lost loved ones. Many people, including myself, have lost their jobs. People are scared. They're hurting financially. They're worried about sending the children back to school. No one understands this better than I do. I've been financially impacted, and I worry about sending my own child back to school. The city of Springfield has been forgotten by Boston for many years, and so I want to make sure that I go to Boston and make sure that Springfield and Chicopee gets its fair share. Again, no one understands this better than I do, having represented Indian Orchard for all these years. On September 1st, the voters of the 9th Hampden District are going to choose their member in the 192nd Mass General Court. And I hope that I have the privilege to be that person. They're going to be electing a lawmaker, and I'm the only candidate in this race that has ever written a law. I'm the only candidate in this race that has legislative experience, and I'm ready to go to Boston and fight and work on day one.
Thank you to all of you for participating today, because voters need information about candidates, and it was an excellent discussion from all three of you. So right now, we just want to remind people that coming up is the election on September 1st. This is a Democratic primary, and that voting is particularly important this year. So thank you for watching. Thank you from Focus Springfield.